the patients that I think about the most in my career, there are either times where I took those opportunities to connect with them or times when I didn't. And the times when I didn't, I feel like I don't want to say I'm ashamed of those instances because I have learned from them, but I'm disappointed in myself that I missed those opportunities to be what that person needed in that moment.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hey everybody, Kevin McFarland here, and welcome back to the Art of Emergency Nursing. I hope the podcast finds you well this week. I hope you're doing okay. Hope you and your family are doing fine. If you haven't done so yet, I would love it if you would get onto Apple and leave me a rating and review for the show. I'd love to read the reviews. I've read a few of them online. We'll continue to do that as they come in. And I'd also love for you to give us a rating. 5 stars is what we're looking for. But you put what you feel. I think you're really going to enjoy this week's show. My guest this week is a longtime ER nurse, ICU nurse, and has been a flight nurse. Not only is she a nationally recognized educator teaching on emergency and flight nursing, but she's also one of the board of directors of the National Emergency Nursing Association. This was a fun interview that got a little different than what you're used to hearing on the podcast, but she gets real and cuts to the heart of emergency nursing. This conversation went a little long, so it's going to be a 2-parter. I'll release part 2 later this week. For now, enjoy the first part of my conversation with Kristen Cline. So are you on the road?
No, I am at home, actually. I am
Good for
enjoying my first day off in like 6 weeks. So.
Oh my gosh. Running, huh?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's been rough, though.
How much are you traveling with Solheim's group?
I can do that as much as I choose to. With being on the board of directors this year, I've had to kind of juggle all my required travel for that and slip in my state travel. And so I do 1 a month, 2 at most, but just it gets challenging to try to fit those in because that's, for a 2-day class, that's usually 4 days between travel and everything else. So trying to kind of fit that in, and I try to kind of squish trips together if I can. I just got back last Friday. I was able to speak at the Alabama EMS Association conference, which was a really cool experience. They invited me. The Alabama ENA was partnering with them on their conference, which was really well attended, and I got really great feedback on the talk I gave, and they invited me back next year, which was super cool. That's a great compliment when you haven't even left the building yet and they've already got you rebooked for the next session. So that was a pretty cool,
isn't that awesome?
Pretty cool experience to have. Yeah. I was a little nervous to speak to EMTs to see, I wasn't sure how, because it's a little bit different culture. You gotta, they don't think quite the same way as nurses. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of a, nurse EMT barrier. And so I was very cognizant of that and hoping that my message would be well received by them. And they were really open to it, really excited about it, and wanted to hear more. So
that's awesome.
Usually people are glad when I'm done talking. So for them to say, we should have given you more time. I was like, oh, cool. Okay. So,
you're like, awesome. Yeah. I love speaking at EMS conferences, and I've done a ton of EMS conferences, and they are so much fun. They are so much fun. They're such a group that's just hungry for new and exciting topics and new clinical topics and new clinical things. It's way more fun than nursing conferences.
They really are. And I have to say, it's an intimidating group for me because my EMS background is flight, but I'm not an EMT. And so I'm always like conscious of this perception that, I'm like a skirt nurse, right? And I know, especially with all the initials, as you probably know, that tends to put up some barriers sometimes with people that think that you're academic and not boots on the ground. And The topic I actually talked to them about was mental health and trauma and trauma-informed care and the effects of trauma on their patients, and then the effects of trauma in their own lives, and then went into a little bit of secondary traumatic stress assessments and interventions and self-care. I mean, there's a lot to go over in half an hour, but I had a lot of guys come up to me and say they were really excited to hear mental health being talked about, and they want to hear more about it, and they were looking for, more actual information they could use. I had a EMS instructor from Florida approach me because I guess in Florida they just passed legislation that I don't know if it's their EMT and paramedic or just their paramedic programs have to include 40 hours of like PTSD, mental health, self-care education. And the current education that they had developed at this particular college was kind of faith-based, and that hadn't been very well received by them. Not that that's a bad coping mechanism or that's not a way to deal with it, but
it's just not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. And I had kind of made the comment of, you do this job long enough and sometimes it's hard to believe in a benevolent God after some of the things that you've seen. So I'm like, I can see how that would be a problem, but I'm like, there's all kinds of tools out there that are not faith-based that anybody can integrate. And so that was really an exciting opportunity that hopefully I'll be able to explore a little bit, because I'm really kind of passionate about helping people find tools that work in our busy, crazy lives, because a lot of the stuff that's out there, like take a yoga class, eat better, join the gym, they just don't make sense for people who are busy like us. And we kind of all hear those things and our barriers go up because we know we're not going to be able to integrate that in our lives. And so then all of a sudden this idea of self-care and alternative therapies and that all takes on this kind of hokey, like, yeah, right, whatever. We get cynical about all of it in general, and we think all of it is nonsense. And so I really want to help emergency nurses, especially, and like EMTs and paramedics, find self-care that works for their life, that makes sense, and help them realize that it's not all nonsense. It does work, it is important, and it can make a difference in your life, but we have to be helping people find the tools that will work for them. So I think right now, unfortunately, there's just a lot of stuff out there that sounds good in theory, but in practice it doesn't work. So
yeah, it's just hard to actually initiate and actually make work. So
yeah, I mean, you have to buy into it to begin with, and that's such a huge challenge to get people to buy into it. And then I think once you kind of break down that barrier and you can help them, see the ways that we make excuses in our own lives for not taking that time, and we can, take accountability for some of the things we choose to do that aren't healthy for us, or some of the things we choose to devote our time to. And I think a lot in our profession, we say a lot of times like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, oh, I have to do this. And sometimes I want to say to people, do you really have to do that, or are you choosing to do that? So
you're like, define have to, because I don't
right.
know.
Like, I have to work this overtime shift. Well, you don't have to. You can say no. You're choosing to, and there might be a variety of reasons in your life why you feel compelled to make that choice, but it's ultimately a choice. And so sometimes kind of reframing the parts of your life that are choices versus the things that you can't choose, I think sometimes that gives you power and control over, okay, what am I truly choosing to do, and can I make a different choice? And so sometimes, you get these like bitter people that are like hate their jobs and, complain about everything all the time. And you kind of want to just be like, no one's forcing you to be here. You chose this. Like you went to school and you chose to do this. Like, this is the profession you chose, you're choosing to work here. So if you can make a different choice if you want to. And now that's the next step of it is, do you want to do something different? And so if you don't want to do something different, then maybe stop complaining about it all the time. Right. So I think so much of it is taking accountability for the things that are choices. And then, like I said, once you take accountability for that, you might have to kind of swallow your pride a little bit and think like, well, yeah, I am choosing to do this. Then I think hopefully, at least for me, it gives you a little bit of power to then start looking at the things that you've told yourself I have to do. Okay, so what things truly do I have to do? Can I start eliminating the things that I don't have to do? You know, can I start choosing more things that I want to do so that, you know, I don't have a life full of things that I have to do. I have things in my life that I want to do, that I choose to do, and, you know, hopefully create some breathing room in your busy life. At least that's what I've done, and I feel like that maybe would be helpful to other people. I don't know.
I agree 100%, because I don't know how many times I hear people, you know, or you see people who, like, they can't get past themselves. Like, they're their own worst enemy. They're, you know, these people who sit there and say, oh my God, I'm so burnt out. And I'm like, because you work 5 shifts a week. You're like, of course you're burnt out. How could you not be burnt out? And, or they're like, oh my God, I fucking hate my job. And I'm like, then get a new job. You're a nurse. You have options.
I know you do. You have so many options. And I think a lot of times as nurses, we have a codependent relationship with our stress and our trauma, because
it's true.
I think a lot of our identity as caregivers is like self-sacrifice and putting everybody's needs in front of our own. And we feel like if we start to choose ourselves and make our own needs, that maybe we're betraying that like caregiver persona a little bit. And some of that I think is unintentional, but again, I think some people maybe find some secondary gain in this martyr role, that like, you know, I'm always having to do this, and I'm so stressed out, I'm so burned out, you know, that's, you know, their identity. And I think that part of that is a trauma response to just the stress and the burnout and the complex PTSD that we all suffer from the things that we've done. And I think because of that kind of general characteristic of nurses, a lot of the problems in hospital culture today, we really sometimes I feel like bring them on ourselves. You know, if you think about like staffing issues or maybe pay issues, and this is a huge thing for paramedics. So this is one thing I was telling them at the conference. I'm like, don't carry your radio around with you all the time. Like, you are putting yourself on, you're in hyper arousal. This is a fight or flight PTSD response, because you have that radio on all the time. That means you're always amped up for hearing those tones go off. You know, there might be an emergency and I need to be ready at all times. So, you know, you've got these guys that, you know, work a job and then volunteer to work another one and then carry their radio around all the time, or their pager around all the time, because God forbid they miss an emergency. And then, you know, there's an open shift and people will fill it, right? And so, you know, paramedic pay is terrible. You know, they make $10 an hour to do a really, really stressful job. And there's this component of, they feel like, well, I have to work multiple jobs. You know, I have to work 8 hours a week in order to make ends meet because they don't pay me enough. But at the same time, I'm like, you guys are like tripping all over yourselves to work that way. I mean, you volunteer to do it for free, which is a great service to the community. But at the same time, you are giving employers an excuse to not pay you what you're worth, because they know that they will use your savior complex to guilt you into filling those shifts, right?
Yep.
They don't have to pay more than that because they know somebody's going to fill it eventually. Yeah. And, you know, we take it upon ourselves to think, you know, oh, I got to fill that shift because what's going to happen? My coworkers are going to be stressed out, or I'm going to, you know, somebody might die or somebody might not be there, you know, and you put all of this thought and worry into other people, but then, you know, what's left for yourself and your health and your life and your family and your quality of life? Like, you know, it's
so many times, you know, I always tell EMS folks, I'm like, you know, it's hard for you. You guys are never going to be able to make as much money as nurses because there's too many of you who are willing to do it for free. I go, how many nurses?
Yes.
How many nurses do you know that volunteer for shifts? Nobody does. Not one. Not one.
I know.
And
I know. And at the conference when I was making this comment, some of the guys were laughing, and one guy said, as you were saying that, I was getting text messages about open shifts, you know, of trying to fill them. And I made the comment of, you know, I had a partner who was a good friend of mine, but my joke was that when he finally drops out of a heart attack at the young age of like 50, probably, there's going to be an instant paramedic shortage in the state because he works at every paramedic, he works at every EMS agency in the county, trying to fill those shifts. And he's the type of guy that sleeps 2 hours a day. And if he sleeps more than that, then he's crabby and he's sleeping in the back of ambulances. And there was a lot of like laughter in the room of people, seeing themselves. And that a lot of that is self-imposed. And, you can't change that culture overnight, right? There's no one like big thing that's going to happen to make that better. But I think, for me, at least, what I did in my own life is I said, I can't change what's happening around me because that like guilt paramedic culture had made its way into my workspace. And so, we were getting guilt trips about open shifts and why aren't you filling the shifts? And my response was, why aren't you creating more incentive for open shifts? Because it is not my job as a staff nurse to fill your open shifts. That's your job as a supervisor to fill the shifts. And so if you can't fill your shifts, then that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. So harassing me because I don't work overtime is not a solution, and it's not an environment I want to, include myself in. So I personally had to say, I'm just going to remove myself from that. I give you 40 hours a week of my life. That's all I'm obligated to do. And the rest of it is for me. And I think each one of us, if we want to make that change, we have to do that individually and decide what our personal boundaries are going to be as far as our work-life balance and being okay with saying no, no, I don't want to be on that committee, and accepting that your no is enough. Like, I don't have to justify why I don't want to work overtime. Like, as my employer, you are not entitled to my reasoning as to why I don't want to pick up that shift. You don't need to know. My no is enough. And I don't need to feel guilty about saying no. Your coworkers will survive. They will. We figure it out. And, what would staffing look like if all of us started making those boundaries and they had to hire more nurses, to fill those shifts, as opposed to just expecting everybody to pick up the overtime and make it work. And, what if that made them look at retention and why can't we fill these open shifts? Maybe we need to pay better, your quality of life as a profession starts to get better once we start standing up for ourselves. We make it too easy for us to be abused. Same with workplace violence. We make it really easy for our employers to ignore that epidemic because we don't make it a problem for them. We keep working. We don't clock out and say, you know what, I just got injured on the job. I'm going to go to employee health and get that taken care of. I'm going to go file for workman's comp. I'm going to go file paperwork against the person that did this, which would be totally normal if you worked anywhere else for all of those steps to happen if you were injured at work. But we continue to take care of the patient that injured us and then stay at work and don't go through any of that other stuff. And so our employers just ignore it because we don't make it an issue. And I hear a lot of people say like, well, nothing ever happens about it anyway, so I just don't say anything. And I'm like, but you not saying anything perpetuates that. Like, if you don't stand up for yourself, then why should anyone else stand up for you? Like,
it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle. And like I said, I think it begins with one choice person choosing that in their life and saying no and being okay with that. And once enough of us begin to do that, I think that's when systemic change happens. But I think we kind of are always waiting for this change to happen from the top down, expecting our employers to take action. And it's not going to happen. It's just not going to. So it has to come from the ground up. And I think once we kind of realize that we have power in numbers and that we're the nurses, especially, there's over 3 million of us. We're the largest single force in healthcare. We have power that we have abdicated because we're too nice. And I'm not saying we have to give up being nice, but I think having boundaries and standing up for ourselves is not being nice. Like, that doesn't make us less of a caregiver. That doesn't make us less passionate about our work. That doesn't make us less dedicated to healing. It doesn't make us less dedicated to our patients. It's just a healthier lifestyle because we have to take care of ourselves. I mean, I look at the turnover and the burnout, and I feel like, it's not necessarily, what is the nursing shortage problem? Is it truly that we don't have enough nurses being prepared to go to the bedside, or is it that they're not staying there? We have to look at that as well. Why aren't nurses staying at the bedside? What is it about nursing that makes them leave? And if looking at the EMS perspective, we've got this pipeline of EMTs to become paramedics to make more money, and then paramedics go to nursing school because they're like, screw this, I can make $20 an hour more and do the exact same job. So then they go to nursing school, and then after a couple of years of bedside, they go, screw this life is terrible. I'm abused all the time. I'm harassed by colleagues, my coworkers, my patients. I'm going to NP school so that I can have a nice 9-to-5 job and have a normal life. I mean, that is a vicious cycle that I personally have seen kind of in my travels and my experience. And I feel like that is a leak in the system we need to kind of figure out.
Right. And figure out how do we stop that vicious cycle, and how do we keep us from being our worst enemy?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. we are so often, we are each other's worst enemies. And
oh yeah, totally.
A lot of times I feel like in the hospital, especially, like, administration doesn't have to worry about taking care of us because we're so busy sometimes stabbing each other in the back and harassing each other and, bullying each other that, we can't even think about making things better for the profession overall because we're still so, like, absorbed in some of the petty nonsense that, tends to overtake us sometimes.
I mean, can you imagine if nursing lobbied the way that physicians do? If nursing lobbied and was as an effective lobbyer as physicians, we would be unstoppable.
I know. Yeah. I mean, if we could just pull together, we would be. And, I'm really excited that ENA is formally partnering with ACEP now on this no silence on ED violence. That, this is a joint venture where we're running on social media. There's hashtags and it's a venue for people to share their stories about violence, to bring kind of visibility to it so that we can make some traction on it. And, ACEP is a great partnership to work with. And I kind of laughed because I felt like now the problem will be taken seriously, because when a doctor is injured, people pay attention. Like when a doctor wants something in the hospital or asks for something or, needs something actionable, like nobody asks questions. If it's the nurses, nurses are easier to ignore, but the doctors don't get ignored. So I thought, maybe finally somebody will take this seriously because now the doctors are talking about it.
Right. Now maybe it'll get a little traction. So
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that partnership, and hopefully we, okay, get somewhere with it at least.
Right. Exactly. I certainly hope so. And I applaud ENA for taking it on, and I applaud them for partnering with ACEP and trying to move that needle forward, because it's an important topic. Holy cow, it's an important topic.
Yeah, it's important, and the visibility of it is what is really important. I got to go to a couple of different Day on the Hill events earlier this year. I went to one in Tennessee, and then National Day on the Hill. And it was, every legislator that I talked to was shocked when we shared their stories, just absolutely shocked. And almost all of them verbatim made comments like, I had no idea that this was happening. I had no idea people behave that way. I just didn't know it was like that. So, using our voices and giving visibility to that, I think will be really great.
I was thinking about it, and just when you said that, I remember talking to our legislators' aides. Gosh, I don't know. 15. Oh no, let's see. Gosh, it was probably 12 years ago. And saying the exact same thing, and them going, oh my God, I had no idea this happened. And I'm like, and we told them at the time, we said, because we invited, I think it was one of the local senators to come, join us, and tried to talk to him, and he sent an aide, and Yeah, which was about as good as you're going to get sometimes, but
Right. Yeah.
and certainly they can affect change as well as anyone else. But and he was just like, "Oh, I had no idea it was this bad," and I'm like, "Come shadow with me for a shift." I was like, "Come to the state's only level 1 trauma center and spend a 12-hour shift with me." I go, "Be my guest. Come join us." And of course, that never happened, but it was like one of those, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. And then, never happened. But I mean, 12 years ago, we were having the same conversation.
Yeah. We're just not making any headway, are we?
So
I think that's another great, initiative with, the ENE is doing is the Carolyn Jones documentary that, in case of emergency, the Emergency Nurse Project, that is coming out next year. I think that is going to do great things for us as far as giving some more visibility to, what it's really like to work in the ER. Yeah. It's fantastic. I was able in July to see kind of a very rough cut of the entire film, and it's just really great. And a lot of it, Carolyn showed, a bunch of the clips at the ENA conference in Austin, and all of the, nurses that were chosen and highlighted, they all just kind of organically rose to the top. I mean, she just showed up at different emergency departments and waited to see what happened. And, the nurses that are included in the documentary that are telling their stories, they're just amazing, wonderful, inspiring people. And I think what's great about them is they're just normal nurses. They didn't come to work that night thinking they were going to be in a, major film. They came to work just to do their job, and she caught them, just doing their job as they normally would. And so I just think they're just a great representation of our profession in general, because they're just everyday nurses. And so it was very cool. I got very kind of like fangirl when I got to meet them in Austin. We had a reception with the board of directors and Carolyn Jones and her crew, and then the nurses. And I stayed and chatted with them for a long time because I was like, I can't believe I'm meeting you guys. Like, I'm huge fans. And I remember seeing one of them at General Assembly, and I kind of poked Jeff. I was like, look, there she is. That's a nurse from New Jersey. She's right there. She's talking. And I kind of was coaching them like, you guys deserve to be famous, and you're going to be famous. So get ready for it, because you guys are about to become the face of our profession, and you deserve to be. Like, the world needs to hear our stories, and you guys are the perfect people to tell them. And I'm so excited for the work of emergency nurses to be highlighted in such a beautiful and raw and honest and real way. And I hope that it will inspire us as a profession to, kind of maybe be proud of what we do, and to maybe share with our families what we do in a way that we can't explain to them ourselves. And what I really like about it too is I think it very gracefully kind of addresses some of the challenges of emergency nursing, some of the social issues, and I'm hoping maybe it will help some of us examine our own internal biases, and maybe the way we think about our patients, and maybe the way that we treat our patients. And hopefully it'll be a nice little maybe like reset button of, this is why I do this, and maybe give them a chance to see things from the perspective of our patients a little bit, and kind of help us maybe not judge them so much. I know that's one of those, it's another, trauma response. It's a protective thing. And I think for me, at least, it's been really helpful to really kind of try to sometimes put myself in my patient's shoes, and to try to see things from their perspective, and try to understand them a little bit. It doesn't mean that you necessarily always excuse their bad choices, or, not to say that they're not held accountable for some of the things that they do. But I think just being able to release some of your judgments and your preconceptions and your expectations, I think just helps treat your own burnout. I mean, I think so much of our stress that we bring on ourselves. Again, like you said, we're our own worst enemies, and we get ourselves all worked up about situations that we really don't need to get worked up about. Like, I always kind of joke that I always hear people get mad about like, oh my gosh, this is such a waste of my time. Like, this is stub toe. I can't believe they came to the emergency room for that. Like, why would they do that? Or, the kids that the parents didn't give them Tylenol and ibuprofen. Oh my God, I can't believe they didn't do that. And how they just came here for free Tylenol. Why would you do that? And that's so stupid. I can't believe that they, didn't know to do that. And I'm just like, I'll take 20 stub toes because that's easy.
Right.
Like, that's easy charting. Like, that's not a lot of work. Like, bring on all the stub toes. That's fine. Like, they just want to make sure their toes not broken. Like, you think it's stupid, but they don't know. So they came here because that's what we do. And, same with like the kids in the Tylenol. Like, they're parents and they're worried about their kid. And how many of us have gone to the doctor and by the time you get your kid there, whatever was wrong with them, they're not doing anymore. And the doctor looks at you like you're crazy and they don't believe you. And then you feel like an idiot and then you don't get the help that you need because your kid looks fine now, right? Every kid does that. It's just like
right,
evolutionarily.
totally.
Like they sit on the doctor's table and smile and you're like, they weren't doing this at home, I swear. And so maybe they've had that experience and, so they decided to bring the kid in when they looked sick just so that somebody would believe that their kid was actually sick. And, they did it because they were worried and they didn't know what to do. And so they went to the building full of people who went to school to learn what to do so that we could tell them what to do and help them and take care of them. Like, they came here because we told them that's what we're here for. And then so many of us just get mad at them for, coming for the services that we told them we provide. I just feel like, what?
It's to help ER nurses relate to that. Because sometimes you don't realize how silly some of the things you say sound. But that's exactly like when the floor nurses say, well, I didn't know I was getting a patient. I was like, well, do you have an empty bed? Because that's what we do at the hospital. We put people in the empty beds. Like, it's the same thing. Like, have you ever called a report and they're like stunned that they're getting a patient? You're like, of course you're getting a patient. You have an empty room. You have you have 3 patients on your assignment. That's typically 4 or 5. Of course you're getting a patient. Like, what did you think you weren't?
I know. My favorite would be like when I would, call a report and they'd get really irritated. And I wanted to just say like, I promise I didn't like pick you out personally to ruin your day. Like, I'm not doing this just because I have a thing against you. Like, this is not personal. Like, I promise as soon as this patient is gone, there's going to be another butt in that bed before we can even clean it. Like,
absolutely.
I'll tell the ambulances to circle the block, but they're still coming. So I'm sorry this messes up your day. This is what you're paid to do. So
yeah.
I just deal with it. So having some of that insight into ourselves, I think would just help us relieve our own stress and maybe, laugh at our own ridiculousness a little bit. And the challenge for me is sometimes, especially like online, like the internet is awful. And I see all these kinds of like really toxic conversations happening. And then when someone like me, like pipes up and says, hey, maybe they were just really worried about their kid and they didn't know what to do. So they went to the place that's open 24 hours a day and puts billboards up all over town saying, if your kid is sick, come here. And they were looking for your help. And that's all. Then you get this like barrage of, oh, well, here comes this, she's the perfect nurse and everything's perfect in her world. And wait till she becomes a real nurse and then she'll know. And then you'll think differently. And can't you guys let us just vent? And can't you let us just complain? And we're complaining and this is what we need to do. And I'm like, this is really not productive for anyone because, you look at it as venting, but this is not stress relief because when you get in this kind of like this vicious, toxic, like, I don't know, circle jerk. Can I say circle jerk?
You say whatever you want.
Of like, of just like anger and aggression. And then everyone just gets amped up. And so your sympathetic nervous system just gets like more and more stimulated. And so again, with like the complex PTSD, like all this stuff, you just can't get over it. Your nervous system doesn't even have a chance to like relax about it and just reset itself because you are just so like irritated about it all the time. And for myself, I kind of had to look at one, like how big of a jerk does it make you sound if you're pissed off that all of your patients aren't dying? Like, you're not dying. Why are you wasting my time? Like, I only care if you're dying. I mean, really?
You're like, come on.
this is why we're the most trusted profession. 1, 2, like, how much paperwork is it to take care of a person that's dying? Like, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of charting. Like, you really want to do that 12 hours a day for the rest of your life? Like, only chart resuscitations? Like, I don't want to do that. Like,
yeah, who wants to do that?
No, nobody wants to do that. And, you know, I get it. We get all like wound up about we're emergency nurses and we take care of emergencies and that's what the emergency room is for. I'm like, yes, in theory, in a perfect world, in a perfect healthcare system, yes, this is what the emergency room is for.
But the question I always want to ask is, have you ever worked for a place that is like that though? Have you ever worked for a place where it's always, you know, level 1 traumas all day long? I haven't. And I've never worked, and I've worked in some busy places, and I've never worked in a place where it's always sick patients. And it's never always sick patients.
No, it's never always sick patients. And that's the thing. It's like, you have to look at reality. And so your expectation going into it is, you know, I'm going to be cracking chests all day and jumping on top of cots and doing CPR. And I'm going to be making out with hot doctors in the supply room. And, you know, like, that's not reality. So
yeah, you're going to be so disappointed.
Right. Yeah. You could be frustrated that your expectations don't match reality. But then again, that is a problem you're creating for yourself. So you have to manage your own expectations. So we manage our patients' expectations in the emergency room, and we tell them, you know, here's what you expected to happen. Here's what's going to happen. And just so we're all on the same page, like, that is patient satisfaction 101. Make sure they know what to expect. They know what they are going to get and what they're not going to get, so that there's no disconnect there. Some of us got to have a come to Jesus with that about ourselves, because if you look at the ESI data, less than 20% of patients fall into that level 1 and level 2 of actively dying or unstable. 80% of our patients are acute, stable, but not emergent. So our patients aren't confused about what the emergency room is for. We're confused about what the emergency room is for. And so much of our satisfaction,
mind blown right there. Like really, set yourself up for success instead of setting yourself up for failure. Have an expectation that like, you know,
that matches reality, you know.
25 to 30% of your patients are going to be complete bullshit. That's just what happens. It happens everywhere.
And you know what? That's the art. That's where the art of nursing comes into play. Because even as a flight nurse, like, I was not using 100% of my skills all the time. I just wasn't. Because if you think about all of like that spectrum of patients that you see in the ER, you have that same spectrum in critical care transport. I think there was this perception that, you know, like, flight nursing is sexy and super cool, and you know, every patient you have is super sick and you're saving lives all the time, and you know, you get the hero walk. And I always laugh that, you know, the hero walk is kind of like jumping out of the plane and like taking out your helmet and like, you know, shaking your head like Top Gun, like, oh, and then you got the danger zone music in the background of like, yes, I'm a hero. And I'm like, dude, those flight suits are super sweaty. I smell like a truck driver underneath there. My hair is all sweaty from being underneath that helmet. It's a greenhouse in there. You are like on top of each other 24 hours a day. Like, I remember one time I walked into the trauma bay, and it was the middle of summer, and we had just pulled a guy out of the ditch. Now, you talk about frequent flyers. I had taken care of this same guy twice as a flight nurse, pulled him out of 2 ditches on a motorcycle, like, same thing. I'm like, wow. Really, dude? You didn't figure it out the first time that you should wear a helmet and not drive your motorcycle drunk? But anyways, so pull him out, you know, give him the deal. We kind of sweep into the trauma bay, and I'm covered in mud, like down to my knees, and I've got this construction like jacket on, or I can't even think of the word I'm for right now. A scene jacket, my scene jacket with like the reflective tape on it, so I don't get hit by a car, which is like 5 sizes too big, so that's kind of hanging off me. And then I got my helmet hair and my super sweaty, you know, hair and everything, and give report to this room, and, you know, put the patient on the bed. And as I'm walking out of the room, our floor pharmacist will be side and like, hey, you look really hot right now. I'm like, I know, right? Flight nursing is so glamorous. It's a glamorous job. Like,
you're like, and if you get close enough, you can smell me.
wait till I unzip this flight suit. You know, there's like this sexy vision of like, ooh, let me unzip my flight suit. And I'm like, no, you don't want me to do that because you'll see like my.
You're like, nobody wants that.
No, I promise that this is not some fantasy that I'm going to bring to life for you. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but the same spectrum of patients you see there. Sometimes we were just a fancy taxi service to get a patient from one place to another. You know, I'd walk into a room and it was a patient that missed dialysis. We all know that patient. Like, well, I didn't feel good, so I didn't go to dialysis. And I didn't feel good the next time, so I didn't go to dialysis. And now I really don't feel good. I'm like, yeah, I wonder why you don't feel good. That's so weird that you don't feel good. That and the nurse without fail would be like, oh, I just gave Paxilin. And I'm like, oh, perfect. I'm about to put this patient in a metal tube in the air with no bathroom. So thank you so much for that. So then you do the wrap the patient up, and then when you get to the other facility, you're like, oh my gosh, that just happened. I wasn't like that before. I promise. Like,
this is so it's of course just happened.
Right, just happened. What? No, that didn't happen.
I'll never forget. We were getting killed in the trauma center. We were just getting crushed in the ER. And I was the charge nurse, and I was like, I need that patient upstairs. And the nurse who's taking care of the patient's like, I got 3 other patients, dude. I don't know what to tell you. So I'm like, okay, I'm taking your patient up if they're ready to go. She's like, they're ready to go. Just take them up. So I get up there, and I get him in the elevator, and all of a sudden I'm like, what? I'm like, oh no. He smelled terrible. And I'm like going, this is like literally as I'm on my way upstairs to the ICU with this patient, and we're rolling off the elevator, and I'm smelling it more, and I'm like going, oh, they're gonna fucking hate me. God, they're gonna hate me. and I get the guy, and I go, the ICU nurse happened to be one of my former EMS students of all things. And I come in and I go, sorry, I kind of brought you something a little special. I didn't realize he's probably got some poop going. So of course she's like, well, let's get him cleaned up before we get him onto the nice clean ICU bed. So we're in the ER, still on the ER stretcher, and we get him rolled over, and he is covered in poo from about his mid back to his ankles. He's just covered in poo. And they're like, and the ICU nurses are all like looking at me, because of course there's like 3 or 4 of them in there to get the guy transferred over. And they're all looking at me like, are you fucking kidding me right now? And I'm like, guys, I'm really sorry. I was like, I literally walked in the room to pick him up, brought him up, and then realized what I had. And they're like looking at me like going, you are a terrible human being. They're like looking at me like, you're a terrible human being. They're like, this didn't just happen. And I'm like, clearly this didn't just happen, but clearly I just became aware of it. And they're like, and the nursing student the nurse who was one of my former students goes, that's right, man. We're used to cleaning up after the ED. We're okay. We got this. And so I'm like, oh, hurt my soul. So they of course get the guy cleaned up and everything else. And I stayed there and helped them. And they're like, dude, you're the charge nurse of the ER. Go do your stuff. Come back for the stretcher. We got this. And I was like, sorry guys. So I go back down to the ER because the pager's going off, and I go back down, and I'm like, I go to the nurse. I'm like, oh man, you don't know how much you owe me. You owe me right now. So the next day I worked, and I brought a dozen donuts and brought them up to the ICU, and I said, hey guys, this is just a peace offering.
Oh, that's so nice.
So
I had one of those happen. We went to like Canada almost to pick up this patient, and it was when we walked into the room, and you just have these moments sometimes where I think we get them in the ER too, where like you take ambulance report and then they show up with the patient and you're like, what, how, why?
You're like,
this is not what you said it was. So we walk into the room, and it was an ICU that we were picking up this patient from, and she was intubated and unresponsive, but like not even on any drips or anything. And like, okay, like what's what's the story here? And they're like, oh, well, she just needs to, we think she might be having seizures because, like, subclinical seizures, because we had her on sedation, and then she wasn't waking up, so we turned off the sedation, and she still wasn't waking up, so we just need to transfer, and it was like Christmas Eve or something like that, so, like, we don't have neurology, and she's EEG, so we're just transferring her for that. And we gave her like 3 liters of fluid today because her blood pressure was kind of low, and her blood pressure was like okay at that point, but her heart rate was like 140. And I'm looking at her, and I've never seen so much third spacing like in my life of a patient. I'm looking at her, and she's just like a balloon. And I'm looking at her Foley catheter, and there's like just a little bit of this like cloudy urine, and I'm like, oh my god, okay. So I'm like, when was the last time she had any sedation? They're like 5 days ago. I'm like,
oh my god.
Okay. So we start kind of. I give her a little dose of fentanyl because just moving people around and transferring them, and it's winter, and getting them in and out, putting them in the transport environment is a lot of stimulation, and I try to give them medications. I just give her a little bit of fentanyl just to kind of help smooth over all those transitions as we start to smooth things over. And she had been just a little bit, she kind of like moved a little bit, but that was the last thing she did. So we start like hooking up our monitor to this patient, and her end tidal is like 80. And my partner's trying to like fix the settings and figure that out. And I'm like, okay, so when was the last ABG checked? And it had been a week since they had done an ABG. And I'm like, how do you not check this on an intubated patient? I'm like, oh my God. So we're trying to get her end tidal down, change sub settings or something. And then we can't get a blood pressure on her. I mean, we've tried like every extremity. We cannot get a blood pressure on her. At this point, it's like an hour that we've been in the room, like trying to like figure out what's going on. And so I'm asking like, what were her labs this morning? And she had labs. They looked okay. And at some point, the charge nurse comes in, and she's like, so what's going on in here? I'm like, well, trying to get a blood pressure on this patient, and I can't. And so until I can get one, I can't really like leave the room. Well, have you tried using a different arm? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't think of that. Wow, thank you for giving me that brilliant idea. And I'm like, yes, we've tried every extremity that she has, so we've not been able to get a blood pressure. Well, I mean, can you use a different monitor? I'm like, no, we're about to get an airplane. Like, this is the only monitor I have, so
like,
this has to work. Well, I mean, she was fine before you got here, so I'm just wondering what has happened in the time since you got here. And in my mind, I'm like, really? Was she really fine? Like, I don't think she was fine. I don't think any of this is fine. So I think we started from leave fed, and I think we were finally able to get a blood pressure somewhere, but, it was not good. And so I'm like kind of cranking up the leave fed, and, I'm like, what is her kidney function? Like, what was her metabolic panel? And this nurse, well, here's what it was. And it was fine this morning. I'm like, it's not fine now, clearly. Like, she's not making any urine. So she doesn't have any. She has like 2 peripheral IVs, and that's it. So we try to get an ABG so we can get some sense of where she's at and get some labs. And all that comes out of the needle poke is water, like clear interstitial fluid, like not even blood. Like, we can't even find the artery, and she just has this fluid just like leaking out of this hole in her arm. And my partner and I were just looking at each other like, oh my God. So I called medical control, which I never call medical control because usually they're not super helpful, but I called because I'm like, this lady needs diuresis probably because her cardiac output recruit if she was diuresed, and she probably needs a positive inotrope. She probably needs like some diffusing or something. I'm already doing Levofed, but her heart rate's too high for epinephrine. I'm like, she needs a bunch of stuff, and I just need somebody to help me like focus on what would help me get her out of this building where they've tried really hard to kill her and get her somewhere else. And I called the doctor, and the doctor was like, can you call somebody else? I'm like, no, you're the doctor. Like, there's no one else for me to call. So we finally get a blood pressure on her. We finally get her somewhat, whatever, packaged up, ready to get out of there. And we get her on the plane, and the flight wasn't very long. It was maybe 30 minutes, which wasn't terrible. And she was not dead, so I guess I call that stable because she
plus. Yeah, that's plus.
we weren't
despite their best
headway.
efforts.
Right. We weren't making any headway, but she still had an end title, so we were, okay. And he's like, do you smell that? I'm like, what? He's like, I think she crapped the bed. I'm like, he's like, what does it smell like to you? I'm like, I don't know. Does it smell like a GI bleed or what? He said, no, it smells like death. It smells like the last death poop. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I'll wrap it up. We can't do anything about it now. So we get to the ICU, and I can't remember how many drips she was on. Probably not very many. And our IV pumps, our portable IV pumps, are these little they're just these little square. They weren't really mounted or attached to anything. And we would kind of just set them on the patient's chest or lap or whatever. And this woman, because she was so swollen and her body habitus was kind of larger. Anyway, we've got all these ICU people, and we're kind of getting her loaded up and ready to transfer over. And we, unwrap the flight quilt, and there is just this lake of poop everywhere. I mean, she could be doing the backstroke in it. It's just everywhere. And the intensivist comes in. Wow. The intensivist comes in as we're trying to move her over. And as he goes, oh, so how are things going? As he does this, the IV pump slides down into Shit River, into Shit Lake, and that's in the middle of the bed, and just lands in this lake of poo. I pick it up by the tubing, and I just look at it and I say, this is how things are going. This is what things are like right now. Right here, this.
You're like,
I'm like, this perfectly
he's like,
illustrates
okay,
how this transport has been. And it took us a good 90 minutes to get out of there after that, because we just couldn't get her separated off of our drip. She was just that sick. And I don't know how she lasted as long as she did in that facility. She had been there for a long time that way, but she didn't survive much. When we checked the next morning, she had passed away after heroic efforts on their part. But they were very grateful that we stayed to help clean her up. And they were kind of like, I can't believe she's so sick. We have all this stuff to do, and we can't even do it because she's covered in poo. And I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. I really couldn't do anything about it. So when we got back, we just decided to send the pump to biomed, because I'm like, it needs a terminal cleaning. There's poo everywhere. I need to take it apart or whatever. And I'm like, how do I illustrate to biomed what the issue is? So I put it in a big biomed bag, and I put the equipment tag on it, and I wrote on the tag, it got poo in it. It has poop inside of it. Is what I wrote. And I was on the counter, and the day shift came in, and they're like, what the hell? I'm like, don't even ask. I took a picture of it, actually, I think, and I put it on some flight paramedic webpage. And I was like, so how was your shift?
That's hilarious. You're like, yeah. I mean, some poor IT guy was going, seriously?
I know, right?
he's like, he just threw it away and said, oh, it's broken beyond repair. We're just going to replace it.
And these were new pumps too. We had just gotten them too. And it still worked.
That's hilarious.
It still worked even though there was poo in it. So that's another super glamorous flight nurse story of the night I dropped a pump in poop.
Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Kristen Cline. I will be posting part 2 later this week, and boy, does it get deep, and not in poo. No more poo stories. I promise. See you later this week.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.